Okay, so I've mentioned in a few videos about the regressive left, and I was going to talk a bit about that subject. There is a case that's been highlighted by the BBC, which to me really signifies this. Um, so I'm going to discuss that particular case rather than the wider subject of what I consider to be regressive leftism. My username is Centrist Philosopher, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because for anyone who thinks I'm coming at this from a right wing angle, I'm not. I'm coming at this from a common sense angle, not left, not right wing, simply a common sense angle. So what I'm going to do is going to read out the report and then share a few of my candid thoughts. And bear with me because what I have to do these days when I see a news report, unfortunately, I can't read it directly from the screen because the way my computer is designed, when I have the camera on, it's a whole screen, so I can't kind of look at another screen at the same time. So just bear with me, please. So this is the headline: The Professor Who Won't Use Gender Neutral Pronouns. That headline is important. I'll come to that in a minute. Anyway, this is what the report says. If you just bear with me a second, I'm just going to read this out. A Canadian university professor ignited controversy by refusing to use gender neutral pronouns. Is he a villain or a victim? University of Toronto psychology professor Jordan Peterson had enough of what he saw as campus culture, where social justice warrior, left leaning, radical political activists run rampant, in inverted commas. In September, he released a video lecture series taking aim at political correctness. He zeroed in on Canadian human rights legislation that prohibits discrimination based on gender identity or expression. Dr. Peterson was especially frustrated with being asked to use alternative pronouns as requested by trans students or staff, like the singular they or ze, and zer, used by some alternatives to she or he. In his opposition, he set off a political and cultural firestorm that shows no sign of abating. At a free speech rally mid October, he was drowned out by a white noise machine. Pushing and shoving broke out in the crowd. He says the lock on his office door was glued shut. At the same time, the University of Toronto said it had received complaints of threats against trans people on campus. His employers have warned that while they support his right to academic freedom, well, that seems to be questionable, and free speech, he could run foul of the Ontario Human Rights Code and his faculty responsibility should he refuse to use alternative pronouns when requested. Going on to the next part. I'm sorry about this reading style. I know it's quite grinding, but it's the only way I can do it. They also said they have received complaints from students and faculty that his comments are unacceptable, emotionally disturbing, and painful, and have urged him to stop repeating them. The university is also trying to organise a civil, respectful debate. I very much doubt that will be a debate, which would include Dr. Peterson to discuss gender provisions in federal and provincial human rights legislation. Either way, Dr. Peterson is not backing down. And it goes on to say, I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time, for 40 years, and they're started by people's attempts to control ideological and linguistic territory, he said. He told the BBC. There's no way I'm going to use words made up by people who are doing that. Not a chance. Dr. Peterson is concerned proposed federal human rights legislation will elevate into hate speech. His refusal to use alternative pronouns. Legal experts disagree. Bill C-16, currently before Canada's Parliament, prohibits discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act on the basis of gender identity and expression. The bill covers the federal government and federally regulated industries like banks or airlines. It also extends hate speech provisions under Canada's criminal code to transgender people. I don't think any legal expert would say using an inappropriate pronoun, while not something that respects the human rights of trans people, would ever result in a criminal conviction, said Hal Kirkup, a law professor with the University of Ottawa who specialises in gender identity and sexuality law. But Dr. Peterson could face sanction under Ontario's Human Rights Code, which extended protection to trans people in 2012. Penalties range from fines and damages to mandatory anti-discrimination training. Dr. Peterson says he does not object to trans people or to choosing which traditional pronoun they prefer. And the report goes on to say, if the standard transsexual person wants to be regarded as he or she, my sense is I'll address you according to that part which you appear to be playing, he said. Finally, but he argues terms like gender identity and gender expression are too broad, are the provisions of radical social constructionists, and are being used to bully opponents into submission. There's only two alternatives to that. One is silent slavery with all the repression and resentment that will generate, and the other is outright conflict. Free speech is not another value, it's the foundation of Western civilization. Dr. Peterson's University of Toronto colleague, Dr. Lee Ayrton, argues he is being alarmist and indulging in slippery slope fallacies on the limits of free speech. If you actually listen and you parse out the arguments, it becomes very clear that this is not about freedom of speech, that is about reducing people's needs as excessive, reducing transgender people's needs as excessive and illegitimate. Dr. Ayrton, who personally asked to be referred to as Lay, okay, so there's obviously an agenda there because they are transgender themselves, recognizes people can find alternative pronouns very jarring, but says if both sides are open to being accommodating in practice, it becomes no big deal. This is no freedom of speech debate. This is not a scandal, said Dr. Ayrton. This is people very publicly working through their own lack of familiarity or understanding of trans people's otherwise fairly ordinary lives. Okay, apologies, that is a little bit in the lengthy side, but I wanted to say all of that in order to get the emphasis of the debate that's being held here. Well, debate. There isn't really a debate. It sounds to me very much like Dr. Peterson is basically bullied into submission. You know, they say we want, like Dr. Lee Ayrton says, we want this to be accommodating and kind of both sides to be heard. Well, that's just contradictory. Clearly, what they're saying is Dr. Peterson is a bigot. He must basically agree with what we're saying, and that's it. Debate over. They're not interested in actually listening to the point of view he is making, a point of view which many, many people would agree with. Um, in regards to transgender people feeling threatened on campus, if there are threats, that is obviously wrong. It needs to be tackled. But I suspect what's probably happened is some people have responded in an overzealous way in response to Dr. Peterson being bullied, and that's really what it is. They are basically making out this man as some sort of monster, some sort of bigot, simply because he is calling for common sense. When you get to the point of actually changing words and messing around with linguistics in order to convenience people's sensitivities, it is utterly absurd. I've long known that Canada is a great hotbed of political correctness. It's one of the very worst in the Western world, in my opinion, when it comes to PC. And this is a jarring example now. The problem with political correctness, it isn't just irritating, it is actually, in its most extreme form, borderline authoritarianism. Um, and I would basically echo what Dr. Peterson said. This is where authoritarianism goes when you start to control how people say things. And it's utterly absurd. Now, the BBC may be claiming that they're neutral in this report. They may be saying that they're letting Dr. Peterson have his say. But if you think about the way they worded the report, the doctor or the professor that refuses to use gender neutral pronouns. So they're casting him as the villain automatically with that headline. They're casting him as a freak, as the one that stands out. And that shows just how spineless and pathetic the BBC is on issues like this. The BBC isn't really interested in hearing both sides. Okay, they may have interviewed him, but the BBC executives, being the loony left they are, have already decided, oh, he's a bigot, we're going to paint him to be a bigot. And I think it's disgusting, to be quite honest. If they wanted to present this in a neutral way, they would say debate over professors' use of pronouns, they wouldn't take sides. They have made it clear that they are on the side of those who are whinging about this. And, we live in an era of ultra sensitivity. I will always stand up against actual bullying, which is why I made the video the other day. But where there is bullying going on in this case, if anything, it's against a professor. Having his door glued shut, having a lecture, what was it, blanked out, this is disgraceful. And it is the path that many Western countries are going down when it comes to these sort of issues to do with basically social constructionism. You know, the hard left love to talk about, let's say, more traditional roles, if I could put it that way, if I haven't just committed hate speech by saying that. They love to talk about that as being a social construct. But who are the ones actually doing the controlling here? Who are the ones who are trying to push legislation to punish other people for words? Nothing I gather from that report suggests to me that this professor is stirring up hatred against transgender students. Nothing suggests to me that he is saying to his students, oh, go out and, these people are freaks, blah, blah. I see nothing to indicate that whatsoever. What I do see is the vultures of political correctness closing in on this man. Now, this opposing professor, Dr. Lee Ayrton, clearly has a vested interest because they prefer to be spoken to in the pronoun they. So that says to me they are transgender, therefore they have a vested interest. So they're obviously not going to be a neutral source. You know, this is just lunacy. It is utter lunacy. And what I find unfortunate about this is that it's being done in the guise of human rights. Anyone who really does believe in human rights should be concerned at how we are seeing in some legislation in the West. There was a similar issue in the UK when hate speech was drafted under the Blair administration that would have made it very difficult to criticise religion without being charged with a hate crime, especially Islam. And ironically, instead of actually buoying human rights and defending absolutely concrete Western values such as freedom of expression, all this does is pander to authoritarianism. And it is just wrong. And if you express your disagreement with this professor by gluing his office door shut, you're the bully, you're the coward. And I back this professor 100%. If he really is having lectures where he is actively promoting violence or hate against transgender people, that's a different matter. But I see nothing in the report to indicate that. And being the BBC, they would absolutely have reported that if it was the case. So to me, this is just madness. Unfortunately, there are people out there who will absolutely endorse this and think there's nothing wrong with it. And say, oh, the professor is a bigot. He must be put down. This is bullshit. This is absolutely. And if I sound annoyed, it's because I'm not only annoyed, I am concerned. Because this is a path that we are going down in the Western world. And frankly, when some other countries laugh at us, I'm not surprised. We have many positive aspects about living in Western societies, but we cannot take that for granted. For example, we talk about how much we value free expression, and we do. And it is still much, much better in the West than many other countries. No question about that. But the regressive left, the spineless, cowardly left, want to bring us down this path. And by the way, when I'm talking about the spineless, cowardly left, I'm not talking about everyone of a left wing persuasion. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about the extreme left. I'm talking about people who want to censor others. How that opposing professor can claim it's not about free speech? It's delusional. Of course, it's about free speech. It's the very antithesis of free speech. The way that what the professor is saying is, it seems to me, he is saying this is about criminalizing common sense. Now, I take the view, personally, that there is still a lot of science to be explored in terms of mental health conditions of people who want to go through gender transition and who are going through issues like gender dysphoria. Those are real issues. They're not something made up by right wing conservatives. These are real issues. And I feel that we have become so obsessed by micromanaging this way that we please everyone in the West that common sense just goes out the window. There are people who will find any reason to be offended. And this professor is being basically, in my opinion, he's being victimized simply because he's not going to toe that line. He's showing courage, if anything, and it's disgusting. I'm not surprised it's happening in Canada because the Trudeau government has pandered to this form of authoritarianism, and it's pathetic. You know, Trudeau presents himself as a progressive. What is progressive about criminalizing someone's opinion? That someone could be charged with hate speech for using the wrong pronoun? Are you serious? At the very most, maybe it can be seen as impolite, at the very most. But hate speech? This is madness. And it isn't just in Canada. In New York City, Bill de Blasio tried to pass similar legislation. This is bullshit. I wouldn't be surprised if we try to pass it in the UK. Our universities, a large number of them are currently run by far left loonies. And in many public bathrooms in universities, they have these gender neutral bathroom signs. You know, the whole debate about what's going on in North Carolina, one of the counter arguments that the trans community use about that is, well, trans people have been using the bathroom for years and no one noticed. True. But who is it that's making the big issue out of this? Who is it that is demanding gender neutral signs? It's trans activists. So if you want to be treated normally, if you want to be treated in your view like everyone else, then stop thinking you're a special snowflake. Stop demanding special treatment. You know, if there is a male facility, female facility, don't make a big deal out of it. Just go to whichever one you prefer. But where this issue is coming about is where it is highlighted. I really do feel concerned about this. I don't consider myself a conservative figure. I don't consider myself to be this old fashioned 1950s backward looking person. But I really am concerned about the way this is going. I don't think it's alarmist at all. I think the professor has hit something important. If he was being alarmist, why did he get the sort of vitriolic response that he got? That's the bullying that's going on here, and it's an utter disgrace. And I hope Lee Ayrton, Professor or Dr. Lee Ayrton, has condemned that. It's just absurd. And, you know, this is something that I think is spreading across the Western world because, quite frankly, the LGBT community is pushing a lot of this. Um, because instead of wanting equal treatment, far too often it becomes translated into special treatment. That's not equality. It's just not. Um, I'm not talking about all LGBT people. I know there are LGBT people who would agree with me. Um, but unfortunately, it's a bit like feminism. They're told that they're victims. Therefore, anyone who has a different point of view, by definition, is the oppressor, is the victimizer. This is absurd. I mean, what would the World War II generation make of this? Really? If we were to face another global conflict, our society of snowflakes wouldn't be able to handle it. It's pathetic. And if someone really does feel like they're being bullied, that people are picking on them, of course that has to be taken seriously. I've always emphasized that. But in this case, it is a professor who's being bullied. It's not a case that the professor is getting transgender students, you know, he's pointing them out and say, oh, these people are freaks, you must bully them. Not at all. He's simply saying that let's get back to basics here, let's get to common sense. I personally take the view if you have a penis, you are male, and you cannot force me to believe that you're female. I will be polite if you prefer the pronoun, well, oh yeah, that's right, he and she is not good enough. Even they won't be good enough in a few years. They will be seen as too traditional. Z and Zer are not real words. They're made up by pathetic social justice warriors, and not the good kind, by the way, because this is a thing. Traditionally, social justice warrior was attributed to brave people like Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi who actually were doing something useful. Nowadays, it's left leaning students who have too much time on their hands and they want to find reason to be offended, so they make up a whole new vocabulary. I honestly believe they spend time on their computers making up these words. Z and Zer are not real words. It's just a crock of shit, to be honest. And if it was just annoying, that would be one thing. But the fact that this is going down an authoritarian line should concern everyone. It really should. So, the regressive left can go and fuck themselves as far as I'm concerned. They are a threat. They are a threat to liberty and freedom. Because in a matter, I reckon in 5 years, there's going to be very real possibilities that disagreeing with a certain ideology is going to be seen as as something that should be illegal. In fact, there's already moves in Sweden to make it illegal to criticize feminism. I'm not making this stuff up. It's crazy. So in about 5 years, in countries like the UK, Canada, and I imagine parts of the US, it will be illegal to criticize feminism. It will be illegal, well, it already is, as we can see in Canada, to use I mean, the idea that someone could potentially go to prison, maybe not at this stage, but what's to stop that happening in the future? Because if this is presented as a hate crime, then it's going to be seen as exactly the same light as if you have a gang of racists beating up a minority. Now, any rational person would see it's blatantly not even close to the same category. It's not even in the same dimension. But we're going to go down that line, and it's total authoritarianism.